All right. Welcome back to another lively episode of Health Without the System, where I'm Dr. Tim Scott, and I'm not going to touch my mic.
My name is Mia Scott, guys. Welcome back. I'm going to first and foremost apologize for my brain fog during this episode. The flu has entered our home, and I am still on the ups of that, thanks to my husband who brings every type of virus, parasite, fungus, who knows, from the emergency room to our house, given that I only leave once a month. But we're here. I'm in it. May have some puke on my shoulder from the kids, but we're here.
I get blamed for everything, but one thing I cannot get blamed for is being an endocrine disruptor, which is what we're going to talk about this week.
I don't know. I might differ that. Anyway, all right. So first and foremost, welcome back to our listeners. Thank you for tuning in. If it's your first time, welcome for the first time and enjoy and go back to all of our episodes. I think this is episode 30. So today we are going to talk about endocrine disruptors. I know that you guys hear that verbiage all the time on quite literally every podcast we've mentioned. So we decided to take a little bit of a deeper dive to say, what are we talking about?
Yeah, I do think it's a term we throw around quite a bit, and it needs some details. Like, people have an idea, okay, maybe this, maybe that. We've talked about it in sunblock and different foods, but it really does creep into every form of our life. We talk about that whole toxic sludge that we live in, and I think the endocrine disruptors are in every single aspect of that.
Yeah. So endocrine disruptors are, and we're going to get into all of this, but they're chemicals that can quietly hijack your hormones. And as we know, hormones are the building block of our entire bodies, or essentially the house that we live in. So
yeah, we're going to talk about this today, but if a chemical out there can turn male frogs into females, what do you think they can do to human anatomy?
Yeah. And did we mention that in the podcast before that story?
I think we did a while back. Yeah.
There were some studies that show that actually happened. So there's a big story on that. If you want, do you want to elaborate a little bit on that? I forget the chemical.
We will. It's in here.
It's in there. Okay. All right. Sounds good. So stay tuned to that story. But basically, the things that we are going to discuss today is falling testosterone levels in specifically our guys. Yes, females too. Our testosterone matters. Usually earlier puberty in girls, fertility issues, metabolic disease, and
all results of
much
endocrine
more.
Disruption. Absolutely. And it's important to note here that we're not talking about fringe science, right? Like, these are EPA documented chemicals. These are generally recognized as safe for human consumption, human use. We'll talk about this again later, but they're okay to go on your skin. It's very important that you don't think of skin as a barrier. You think of it as an entry point, and we will remind you that by the end of this episode. You will know what to avoid, why these things exist, who benefits from them, and what we can do to stay safe.
Yep. So before we go any further, let's define what an endocrine disruptor actually is. Because, like we said, this term gets thrown around a lot, and a lot of people still don't really understand what this means. So what does it mean? Define very plainly, an endocrine disruptor is a chemical that interferes with your hormones. How? It can mimic them, it can block them, and it can scramble the messenger altogether.
Yeah, the important thing to understand here is you can't really tell the difference between some of these like hormones, some of the chemicals. So your body, if it looks the same structurally, like going back to organic chemistry here, but if it's structurally similar, it might be just a good enough. This endocrine disruptor might be the right type of key to fit into the receiver. So that's how your body kind of gets tricked. You mentioned that's how hormones might get hijacked. That's how our metabolism gets sabotaged. And this is where things go awry.
Yeah. And so just to elaborate on that, mimic them, like Tim said, they look a lot of the molecular structure. So they can, like Tim said, our body doesn't really recognize the difference between that. So it can mimic them, bind to the receptor. It's not beneficial to us in any way. And as we'll get into, it's actually can be detrimental to our body. So if it's binding to the receptor, our body's not recognizing that that's a fake hormone, and our real hormones aren't able to bind to the receptor and do its job. So it can block our real ones, mimic our real ones as well, and block that receptor. And then, of course, scramble the message altogether. And we will get into that.
Yeah, I think the other thing that we have to remember is that hormones are very powerful, and it's very small, tiny, minute amounts of hormone can do a lot of signaling, can do a lot of changes, and a small amount of an endocrine disruptor can do a lot of damage. And, people who aren't super familiar with physiology or hormones, there's one sort of like way we think about it. You can think of them as text messages. And basically, it's hormones are sent, from one organ to another or one part of your body to another and tell them what to do, just like you might send a text message. And that can include things like growth, development, your organs, your skin, your brain, different gonads, right? Like ovaries in the females, testes in the male. It can tell your body to go through puberty, and then eventually they can tell your body to ovulate and produce an egg or produce sperm if you're a male.
Yeah.
Also fat, stress, cortisol, everything, it's all comes back to hormones.
Yeah, and how we handle stress as well. So, in like Tim said, their text messages, that is our real good hormones. But when you come to endocrine disruptors, they are like your spam text messages, meaning your body doesn't recognize, is this real? Is this not? Do I believe this person? Are they?
Yeah. Is this a fake message?
Yeah. And then they can also block signals. So your body can either get the wrong message, get too much of this message, or doesn't get a message at all. Therefore, your body can kind of jam up these signals. And that's why they are called endocrine.
Yeah, that's a good one. Hormones are signals. Endocrine disruptors are signal jammers.
There you go.
Like
Jammers. Signal jammers.
Say it 5 times fast.
I said 10. Anyway, so how do endocrine disruptors actually do the disrupting? This is also something that I've talked about before. Estrogen mimics, and these are what we would consider xenoestrogens.
So let's categorize this into groups.
Yep.
So let's talk about group 1.
Yep.
Estrogen mimics xenoestrogens.
Okay. And some of these chemicals act like estrogen. And as we know, it is very important in the female and male body. But once again, like we said, they can bind to these estrogen receptors. They can turn on estrogen signaling on when it maybe shouldn't be. They can amplify it beyond normal. And when this happens in men, women, and children, like I said, it's not just females. So examples like you'll hear later, the BPA, BPS, phthalates, certain pesticides. And of course, this is going to have a downstream effect on your body.
Yeah. And just as important as your estrogen mimics or your xenoestrogens, then you get into group 2, which is your androgen blockers. And these are anti-testosterone effects.
And right before we talk about that, the effects that you might see of the downstream of these xenoestrogen like mimickers are an estrogen dominance phase. Maybe you can have some breast tissue changes, even in males and females, fertility issues, early puberty in both boys and girls. So those are just some things to say that maybe you have some estrogens or xenoestrogens blocking.
Yeah, and I can't remember the statistic. I've come across it before, and I came across when I was putting this notes together for the podcast. There's a statistic about early puberty or early menarche, the age of menarche now compared to 20 years ago, you're really seeing that come up.
Sure.
And I don't remember the number offhand, but I want to say now, we're seeing it in some girls at like 8, 9 years old, and the average age might be like 10 or 11 when it used to be more like 13, 14, something like that. So these are real world effects. And then that, of course, has to do with how long you're exposed to estrogen throughout your lifetime and just lots of other things like that. But like you said, you have the xenoestrogens group 1, so you might get more estrogen dominance. Now, and then you have group 2, your androgen blockers, which are your anti-testosterone effects. And I think it's important to understand that these things can coexist, right? Like it's not like a certain food is like, okay, we've got estrogen blockers, we're estrogen mimics, we're not going to have androgen blockers. So imagine if you get things together, or you're wearing a clothing and eating food where you have estrogen mimickers, so now you're estrogen dominant, and androgen blockers, these things start to add up. So group 2, the androgen blockers.
Yep. And instead of binding to like estrogen, they will sit on the androgen receptors, or like Tim said, they can suppress the testosterone production. They can also interfere with the conversion of DHT.
And DHT is super important, right?
Very, very important.
So embryogenesis, like this is what's responsible for male development during embryogenesis. You need DHT. And then later on down the line in life, DHT is kind of what's responsible for all those puberty characteristics, the growth of facial hair, enlargement of the testes, eventually sperm production, libido. Right. So these are the kinds of things that drive men to be men.
Yeah. And if your body is trying to be male but keeps getting shut down when androgen blockers are present, this is how you can also have issues. So what happens when you have these androgenic side effects from these
androgen blockers?
Androgen blockers. I almost said the xenoestrogens again.
So
low testosterone. Sure. Yep, and everything that Tim just said. So as the reverse of that, go ahead.
One important one in there, low testosterone, but poor sperm quality too. Yeah. So I think it's not just that the androgens are decreasing, it's that the product of androgens are becoming less quality, right? So I think 20 to 30 years ago, if you started talking infertility, I think most of the time the woman was to blame. If you went to a fertility specialist, it's like this problem with that, this problem with that.
Right.
Well, more and more common now, there's issues
Much
with the
more
male.
common.
Yeah.
Much more common. Yep. And like Tim said, that's going to affect them. Their sperm issues and production and all of that. So, and then also we know that testosterone, we preach this all the time, muscle mass, very, very important. And so now you have lower or decreased muscle mass, which then can equal fat gain, mood and motivation changes. And this is things that we are seeing as the populations come. I mean, we test for hormones a lot in our clinic as well. And I'm telling you, I have never seen some of these hormone levels so low. I mean, I'm talking 40-year-old males who should be just raging with testosterone if they're doing everything right. And the one I just had last week had a testosterone of 110. Like, it's crazy how low some of these testosterones can get. And he works at a factory, like, he's around chemicals. It matters.
Yeah, men are overall becoming less manly. And I saw something interesting when I was reading this, like when women are on birth control, and I mean, look how many women are on birth control for not only birth control, but other effects. But there's actually like something that makes them more attracted to more feminized men. So like men with softer facial features, maybe lighter skin, softer jawbone. But then when you come off estrogen, you have the potential to change that and like then want or be attracted to a more manly man, more, traditional manly looking man. So I just find that interesting. Like if you could look at population studies and maybe how relationships change as women get older and all of a sudden they stop the birth control, like, is that when we're seeing now a divorce rate climb?
You're like,
or,
wait, what am I married to?
Yeah. So I just think that's all interesting. All right. So group 1, xenoestrogens, group 2, androgen blockers, group 3,
thyroid disruption. And we know that metabolism will get majorly hit with this one because your thyroid is your metabolic organ. And if that is, dysfunctional, then, throw everything right out the window. So, and this does not get enough attention. This is why we also launched our own thyroid visits as well, because we see more hypothyroid more than anything due to a lot of these issues. But some of these chemicals can block the iodine uptake and others will interfere with your T4 to T3 conversion. For those of you who don't know, T4 is your inactive thyroid hormone. Your T3 is your active thyroid hormone, and you want the active. And if your body can't do that conversion properly, you will feel like a giant sack of garbage.
Yeah, and I think we talk about thyroid hormone in the adult population a lot, but remember that thyroid hormones control metabolism, brain development, growth, especially in kids.
Yep.
The thyroid is very active in children.
Yep.
And when you start to talk about these thyroid disruptors, that's early on. That's pre-pubertal, pre-puberty changes that are going to affect you for life.
Yeah, and even in the small pediatric population that we do see, if they're overweight or obese, we will see a sluggish thyroid with them as well because those go hand in hand. Of course, it's not just one single thing. It's that lifestyle and that toxic load that we constantly talk about. Your food, your environment, your sleep, your chemicals that you're constantly exposed to. These will all affect and impact organs differently. And then you have, a world of problems.
Yep. And when you start talking about the consequences of thyroid disruption, we've said it many times, but fatigue, weight gain, brain development issues, and then the subclinical hypothyroid patterns, like you mentioned, not every doctor is kind of hip to what you need to order to check testosterone, thyroid. But even when you're getting that TSH, and we're seeing that way off, and again, we will see people, we have clinical laboratory normal, which is, I don't know it offhand, but it's like 0.8 to like 5 is clinically laboratory normal for TSH. And we know, we like it in that 2 range.
Yeah, 2 or under, 1.5 would be great.
Agreed. And so when we're seeing a 4.5 on a TSH and the traditional doc is saying like, oh, you're within normal, we're looking at that like, no, we have some clinical problems here. And then you might see, fatigue, weight gain, hair, skin, all the things we talk about.
And I will just give you a very quick story of myself because it can also be stress. I have dealt with a significant amount of stress the last few months. And this goes back to the beginning of this year where I had a lab draw just as like some, hey, here's a free test, go ahead and get it done. And they only did a TSH on me and it came back as 5. And I about lost my mind because at this time I was so incredibly stressed with what was going on with another job that I was shedding my hair. My fatigue was insane. I had adrenal dysfunction, which I already tested for. And to them, that was normal. And I'm like, this is not normal. Then I go and get everything else done. I had a low free T3, which remember that's your active hormone, and a very high reverse T3, remember that's your thyroid blocking hormone. And my stress level is through the roof. It took me about 4 months-ish. All the lifestyle changes, really worked hard on adrenal support, 0 thyroid medication, and I got that down to significantly better. My hair is better now. It matters. And just remember, and we'll go into the cortisol and stress next, but that can have so much of an impact on your thyroid, and you don't even, things won't even recognize for your PCP that could be a major contributing factor. So just know that you can fix these things naturally.
All right. Well, Captain Thunderstealer. So group
Beat that
4
story.
is cortisol and stress axis interference. So
Yes.
these are out there too. There's the stress system. These chemicals disrupt adrenal function. This will alter the cortisol rhythms, and this can increase baseline stress signaling. This really has, like you said, systemic effects. And, you went into detail on how that can affect the thyroid, but this can affect every different cell of the body. And you have to think about leading to increased or more chronic inflammation. This can cause more anxiety and more insulin resistance that's so heavily linked to that cortisol and stress axis. And then people won't really understand why. Like, why is my fasting blood sugar 120? I eat, amazing. I work out, and it's all connected, your body as a whole.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that story, cortisol, and when Tim just said that your glucose can spike, your glucose can spike irrelevant of food intake. They did some studies on some younger kids that were playing video games. They put a CGM on them, or a continuous glucose monitor. They did not give them food, and they would monitor their glucose with them playing a game. And during a stressful time, they would have a big glucose spike. So, needless to say, you can have a spike in cortisol, which then will spike your glucose irrelevant of food. So a lot of times if I have my patients come in and all their labs look great, and maybe they have one single fasting glucose a little bit higher, but their A1C and their fasting insulin is beautiful, I will ask them, how did that morning go? Were you running around like a chicken with your head cut off? Were you almost late to get your labs done? Were you super stressed with this morning getting your labs done? And they'll be like, yes, but I didn't eat anything. And that just shows you how much stress can play a role on glucose. But imagine doing that every single day, multiple times a day, and spiking that cortisol. That's going to have a major impact on your adrenal functioning.
I completely agree. That's a good real world example.
Yeah.
And kind of just transitioning into the importance we mentioned. So we covered the 4 main groups, and then I just want to emphasize how tiny doses matter here, because this will sometimes blow people's minds when you think about it. There's this old adage that the dose makes the poison, right? And I think we've sort of tried to blow that mantra out of the water. Like, poison's poison.
Yeah,
it doesn't
for
matter
sure.
how little the dose is. Poison's poison. Do we tolerate lower doses? We do. And you can kind of relate that, I think, to food as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know that chain pizza is poison, but I'm once in a while going to tolerate that poison. Like, we just do. Maybe a couple times a year we get chain pizza. But I've been craving your sourdough pizza lately. But anyway.
All right, sounds good.
So this part's important. So hormones work at parts per trillion. Endocrine disruptors, they work at that same level. So that little bit won't hurt you thing, yeah, maybe today, like when you get that endocrine disruptor, I'm not going to turn into a female. But when you start adding it in from every single source and it becomes more and more, those parts per trillion really add up, and it has a huge downstream effect. And these lower doses can have really big effects, sometimes even bigger than higher doses, based on the way that physiology works.
Yep, I totally agree. And remember, it's not just food. We're not just talking about food here. We're talking about your entire life, from sun up to sundown.
We got it in here too.
Yeah,
we'll
just do a quick talk. It's about what you put on your skin, about what you're breathing in, all the things. So it does make a very, very big difference. Go ahead.
Yep, I was just going to say, also not to be forgotten, dose is important, but sometimes more important than dose is timing. And if you remember one thing from this episode, it's that timing can sometimes matter more than the amount.
Yep.
There's very high risk windows in your life.
Yep. And some of those high risk windows are going to be those things that we talked about that can impact the most, meaning pregnancy, of course, your fetal development, infancy, your childhood, as you're growing, as you're developing all these hormones, puberty. Tiny exposures at the wrong time can literally permanently alter this type of development. So you don't just want to bounce back from hormones early on. You want to make sure that at each major phase in life, you're working extra hard to making sure that you're not exposed to a lot of these endocrine disruptors.
So now we get to the story that you wanted to mention. And I feel like this should kind of ruffle everybody's feathers, because it's not like we just, figured this out in humans one day. Oh my God, we screwed up. We figured this out in animals. It was accident, and frogs were turning into females, but we didn't do anything about it.
Yeah, we just kind of left it. And it's the atrazine.
Yeah, we've talked about this before, but the atrazine frogs, and we call this the story that should have ended all of this. Like,
Sure.
the world should have looked at this and said, okay, that's a problem.
Yeah, and no kidding. And obviously we can't like re-experiment with humans because that's not morally or ethically right, but we found this in frogs and we still know that we are spraying things that can still cause this. So
let's set the stage.
Yeah, let's just tell you what this is. So atrazine, it's the story that, like Tim said, we should have just end all be all stopped that, but it did not. So atrazine was a widely used agricultural herbicide.
Well, not was. I guess it was much more.
Forms, yeah. And it's primarily sprayed on corn, sugarcane, and
sorghum.
Yeah, sorghum. Yep. But obviously, corn is a massive producer in the world today. It was introduced in the 1950s, and it was one of the most commonly used herbicide in the U.S. and regularly detected in groundwater and drinking water, especially in the Midwest.
Hey, Ohio.
Lucky us. All females over here. And here's the first red flag. It was banned in European Union because of hormone and environmental concerns, of course, but it's still legal here. Whoop-de-doo. What isn't?
Yeah. So there's this scientist, right? Dr. Tyrone Hayes. It's the 1990s. He's this biologist. He's at UC Berkeley, a really prominent center out in California, and he's hired to study atrazine. And here's the important or cool part of this. He was not hired to prove harm. He was actually funded by the manufacturer to show that atrazine was safe. He was an academic scientist. He's in controlled lab conditions. Environmentally relevant doses were used in these experiments. This is not like an extreme exposure, something that would never happen in nature. So Hayes took these male African clawed frogs and he exposed them to very low levels of atrazine. And frogs are a big deal in science. They are hormone sensitive. They're easy to study, and their development sort of mirror like key endocrine processes in humans.
Yep.
So he used levels that were below what the EPA considered safe. So this is similar to what's found in contaminated water supplies. And what happened?
They turned to females.
Yeah.
It was a chemical castration of male frogs. So they had not only shrunken the testes and suppressed the testosterone, they lost their mating behavior, which means they obviously didn't reproduce. And then it got worse. Some of the male frogs didn't just become infertile, they developed ovaries. They produced eggs and they engaged in female reproductive behavior. So we have genetically male frogs that are now laying eggs, producing ovaries, and functioning as female frogs.
Yep.
I don't even have any words.
Like,
for that.
how does that not just make someone vomit? Like, oh my God, we need to, change this. And what was the mechanism behind this? Well, atrazine, it didn't add estrogen. It actually increased aromatase activity, and it took the testosterone present in these frogs and converted it to estrogen, and it shifted the hormone balance permanently. So the frogs didn't just act female. Their biology was rewritten. They became females.
Yeah.
Like, that's just crazy to me.
And and like Tim said, their exposure levels were considered safe. And I want to be very clear here. If this happened to humans, it would be the biggest medical scandal in history.
Well, so obviously this had to be a big scandal in science, right?
For sure.
What happened? Did they pull, all the fun? Did they sound the alarm? What happened?
Nope. Instead, funding for Hayes' research was cut. He was publicly attacked. His credibility was questioned, and his results were labeled controversial. Because, of course, if you can't produce the results that they wanted, they're going to make you look like a whack.
Yeah, so this is a very common theme in science, right? Like, if you can introduce doubt, then you can change the narrative. And that's all that has to happen. You can get on the TV and you can, or the radio, whatever year it is, and you can say, factually, this is what I found. And everyone's like, oh, wow, that's interesting. And all it takes, the people who don't want that information out there, all they do is spread doubt. They just get people, and nowadays with social media, it's so easy to have an opposition group get on there and question this, question that, and doubt it. And now all of a sudden, who's right?
And the data was never disproven, meaning it was never redone to show that scientist was wrong. It was discredited socially and not scientifically. You guys, does that sound familiar? How many things have we discredited socially? But we know, and by we know, I mean, if you know, some of these studies that you're like, how are people still believing this? Did you even read the studies? And that's what happened here.
I have to talk about this for a second. I have engaged, and I try not to engage on social media with, the downside. I try to just spread the positive messages, share information that I find relevant, and I try not to banter too much. But I've really been excited about the changes in the food pyramid. I think they're really good. Do I think it's perfect? No, but I think it's a huge step in the right direction.
Yeah, it's better.
I mean, I just have gotten to arguments the last few days about people who are like, but what about this? What about that? And I'm like, oh my God, you're killing me. Can you please share your data? I'm like, first off, they're just saying to eat real food. Like, I get so annoyed when people want data about eating real food. That just makes me mad. But if you want data, why don't you go to the website and look where there is a guide that lists all of the authors and the 120 pages of data that support it. So anyway.
Like, you're not going to redo it just for these people.
And rant.
And also, if you want to eat the upside down food pyramid of what it was, have at it. You're going to be on a handful of medications, and that's your prerogative.
So
anyway,
like we said, it was published data, replicated findings, clear environmental relevance. Oh my God, I need to take a break.
Yeah,
and yet it was, sort of pushed to the edge. This guy was marginalized, and you didn't hear so much about it.
It's 10 o'clock at night if you guys are wondering for us. But anyway, frogs are not special. Hormones are hormonal. Sorry.
Oh my God.
Hormones are hormonal. That's my favorite sentence that I always tell my females as we're going over hormones. But moral of that story, hormones are hormones, which means endocrine systems are deeply conserved across all species. We're the same thing. Obviously, we're not frogs, but our hormones still can act the same way.
Yeah.
Which leads me back to the point real quick for the people who've never looked up their water. That EWG.org website, it'll show all the toxins that are allowed in your city water. You type in your zip code and it'll show you. Now, granted, it doesn't have some of these things like the herbicides and things, but it does have things that are significantly past the recommended daily allowance. And I mean by like 400 times.
Yeah, it'll say like 400x, and you're like,
oh,
that's cool.
Do not drink this. But then we
tell
people,
I'm sure that's fine.
Drink
take a sip.
8 glasses a day.
So
anyway.
You might be thinking at this point, well, how could it get any worse? But it can, because atrazine isn't unique. This is one chemical that we're talking about, one compound, right? And this is one that just accidentally got caught in the act. But there are thousands of chemicals out there with similar endocrine disrupting properties, and maybe not quite to that extent. But like we said, it's timing, it's dose, like all of this matters. And the crazy thing is, a lot of these that are allowed in our food, on our clothes, wherever, they haven't even been tested like this.
Yep.
And you know what's even more interesting? We are 28 minutes into this, and we are where we're supposed to be at 13 minutes on our notes.
You talk too much. Okay, so how did this stuff get into everything as we are going to launch into our next topic here? To understand how endocrine disruptors ended up everywhere, you have to go back to after World War II, where companies needed new service lines for their chemicals, so technology didn't disappear, and it got repackaged with massive advances in petrochem, plastic, synthetic fertilizers, pesticides.
Yeah, all of this stuff, right? We have, all of these things are producing stuff for World War II. All of a sudden, World War II ends, and they're like, well, we're still producing. We still need to make money. Let's do this. Let's make plastic, Let's make synthetic fertilizers.
Let's make it cheap and lightweight and durable and scalable and made from petroleum, which, by the way, if you've heard me talk about this, it's called a forever chemical. Petroleum is a forever chemical. It's in your lip balms. It's in your lotions, your balms for your children, like your butt balms, whatever the heck that one, we don't even buy it.
Oh,
it's Aquaphor.
Yeah.
Is that it?
No, I think it was something different, but whatever.
Are you sure? I think it is.
Maybe
It's like 58 or it's a high percentage petroleum. That when it says it's a forever chemical, it means it takes like 30 plus years to leave the body. I'm sorry, but you should not be lathering your kids or yourself in them. So these are the things that we are talking about, and they are generally recognized as safe, meaning, which we'll get into, but meaning that
we've talked about it before, but we'll talk about it again.
It just means that there really wasn't any studies done, and we'll get into
very quickly. These companies found out that these are convenient, they're profitable, it solved problems that the industry cared about, and of course, when that happens, it's not going anywhere. But the key point here, human biology was not a part of this conversation, right? It was not a part of the design characteristics of the Tupperware company and Teflon, Calphalon, any of these things. So
no, they wanted higher yields, cheaper food, less labor, all the trends that keep us sick and near deadly.
And same thing with agriculture, right? Pesticides in the Green Revolution, they tell the same story, exactly what you were saying. But no one asked what happens. What about when you spray it on the crops and then all of a sudden they end up in the soil, the water, then it goes downstream, it runs off, ends up in your body.
Yeah.
And nobody's saying, especially back late 40s, 50s, 60s, nobody's saying, well, how's this going to affect our hormones later?
And just a little tip off of that too, I can't remember what percentage of it, but the 3 top most common drugs found in our water are statins, birth control, and blood pressure medications.
Yeah.
And I think the first 2 were statins and birth control, which is like, hello, you have men out there drinking tap water. They have no idea that they have birth control and blocking hormones. It makes you really question.
It all comes
together. Yeah, it really does.
So regulation, didn't come till after exposure, not before like you would like it to. And this is due to a critical distinction that most people don't realize. And we've talked about this before, but in the US, chemicals were assumed safe until proven harmful. And I just feel like that's so stupid. Like, I'm just rubbing my head because that's so stupid. Like, let's just assume it's safe until harm is proved.
Yes.
Instead of requiring a company to prove safety before widespread use.
Yeah.
You could just assume this is not going to cause harm. Like, that is so stupid.
Correct. And this goes back to the Gross laws, or the generally recognized as safe. And this was launched in 1958. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that there was a single company that actually released that, oh yeah, actually what we're doing is damaging. They had to get sued by somebody else and then proven that it was damaged. But since that law has come out.
Yeah, the burden of proof was on damage.
Yes.
Not prevention. Yes.
Correct. So basically this Gross law means that you can do whatever you want, but it's up to you to prove that it's safe and effective, but you can go ahead and launch it, worldwide. And then it falls under that Gross law. So it's generally recognized as safe. I don't know about you, but I don't know about the word generally is just such a loose term there.
We generally recognize that as safe.
Generally
Go ahead and use it. And it allowed substances to bypass the formal FDA review. How we feel about the FDA, not the greatest company on earth, or not the greatest organization on earth. But anyway, so now allow it to go ahead and bypass that as well. And there's even, less examination. But so the downfall, we already mentioned, companies can self-determine GRAS or GRAS status. And there was no requirement for long-term studies. Multi-generational data was non-existent. They didn't have to do low-dose endocrine testing.
Mm-hmm.
All safe really meant at the time is that this is not immediately toxic. Like, they took a spoonful, didn't die. All right.
Yep,
it's generally recognized as safe.
Right. You're still standing, but they didn't test how long it takes you to continue to have that, and then have all these lab testings of endocrine disruptors and all the things. And then what's even more frustrating, which we hear this and see this all the time, is the chemical recycling shell game, which means that once a chemical that was launched gets bad press.
Like Atrazine.
Yes, it's restricted, banned, but guess what? An identical form will come right back up in its place and sound just as fancy until that's proven.
So Atrazine's no good, but we've got Matrazine. That's just a joke, but still, that's exactly what's happening out there.
Yeah, for sure. So examples: BPA turned to BPS in BPF, one pesticide, like a chemically close cousin type thing. So exactly what Tim said.
Different name, same hormone disruption. Yeah. Regulators treat them as new compounds, and all of a sudden we act like, okay, well, this is new, we're good.
We're all going to go to this. And by the way, they're owned by the same company. Yeah. It's like, should we trust this person again? Probably not.
And the next logical question is, why hasn't this stopped? And I think there's the answer to that is multifold, but there's no real one villain here. It's systemic. Mm-hmm. And we talk about some of these things all the time, but corporate lobbying, regulatory capture, economic dependence on cheap materials, and fragmented oversight. FDA, EPA, NIH. These are all systemic problems that are going to take monster changes to fix. And I still don't see any of that coming anytime soon.
Well, money talks, man. Money talks.
And bull walks.
Yep.
But anyway, when you think about it, we already said this, we didn't run, and I like thinking about this in terms of recent jabby kind of things, 2020-ish. But when you think about it, we didn't run safety trials. We ran exposure trials.
Yeah, we are the trial.
We are the experiment. This has happened so much in history, and I'm 41 years old, and, over the past few years, I think we've woken up to corruption, to things, people that aren't your friend that you think are, government agencies aren't your friend that you think are, but it blows my mind how often we, the people, are the experiment. And this is just happening. And it seems like money and corporations are just kind of sitting back like, well, let's see how this goes.
Right, for sure. And like your
and when there's
fine, but,
lobbyists and corporate capture, the government's in on it. Yeah. And I really hope that changes. I really do.
It has to change. I mean, I think more people are becoming a little bit more aware too. You really can't trust everything that you see in the media. Once again, media is owned by the same media companies, and they all spewed out the same evidence or research.
So we kind of already transitioned into it, but we wanted to talk about this in this podcast. Why isn't anyone talking about this? How do we pull back the curtain here without sounding like straight conspiracy theorists? Who knows? But We talked about the fragmented responsibility. You know, there's no single owner of hormone health. There's no single owner of pretty much any human health. But we mentioned FDA, which is food, EPA, which is environment, and NIH, which is research. Don't get me started on the NIH. But
don't get me started on any of these things. We can have multiple podcasts on every single thing that we just discussed.
We should have a corporate capture podcast. That would be kind of fun. We've talked about it a little bit in like the big food, stuff like that. But corporate capture would be good to talk about.
That would be kind of mind blowing.
Okay.
Anyway, so lobbying power, like Tim said, big ag, big food, chemical manufacturing, money, money, money. Sound familiar? They own and operate hundreds of billions of dollars annually. Companies like Monsanto, now they own Bayer.
Right.
Once again, they cause a problem, they have a solution for the problem, and they own the same company. We've seen this time and time again. What is that in food pyramid?
Yeah.
When we go over Monsanto, we go over the Kraft and Nestle's and General Mills and all these same companies that own so much of your food that you never even knew.
Then the problem is they own the science
They
behind
own the
it.
scientists behind it, and they can manipulate
And that's
data.
why when people say trust the science, you can't. Like when these companies own the scientists, they created the science, they manipulate. You can't trust the science.
Right.
You have to look at where it comes from.
Yeah.
And, you know, these are chemical giants producing pesticides, plastics, food additives.
Addictive. They literally studied years on how to make food addictive to put it in your pantries.
And what people have to understand is they don't just sell products, they shape policy, right? They have the people in place to shape the policies. And that's just what's scary. And that's what's frustrating to me as you get to know it.
No kidding. And when a chemical makes billions of dollars and harm takes decades to prove, you know, the system will choose profit every time.
There just has to be a problem. We have to understand as the American public, there's a problem when agribusiness and food manufacturers, if you look at their budgets, and I don't know what parts of this are public and what parts of this come from, you know, whistleblowers, but tens to hundreds of millions of dollars every year from one company might be spent on lobbying. So you send your representatives to Washington, D.C., and wherever that $100 million goes from Bayer or Monsanto, that helps them get the policies they want and bury the studies they don't want and get doubt in the news and naysayers on social media. And at the end of the day, they just turn us against each other, right? Like it's an age-old tactic. Like let the peasants fight amongst themselves, let them destroy each other, and we'll sit back and, you know, reap the rewards, get rich.
Yeah, because there are never going to be so many studies for this to prove that all this stuff is wrong, like how toxic our food is and all the things. I mean, it takes a really long time to change. But I mean, I think we're onto something. We know that disease is very, very on the rise.
I agree. We wanted to mention lobbyists. I think we just went into that. We briefly mentioned regulatory capture before. And just for anyone who's not aware, regulatory capture is basically industry-funded science. So former executives move into regulatory agencies. Like, you used to be the head of Pfizer, and now all of a sudden you sit on the panel that approves vaccines, right? Like, we have to know that that's a problem. Or regulators later move into industry jobs. So you were on the panel of vaccine approvers, and now all of a sudden you move into this job where you're creating them and you know what this body looks for to approve them. So,
and by the way, you have financial gains on the seat that you sit on for whatever you're passing or selling, which we see all the time. All the time. So. And it's not public. It is public knowledge, but it's not out there where people know. Like, you have to know that if someone has a massive financial gain to push the things that they do in the seat that they sit in, you can't think that that's not corrupt a little bit. Anyway,
I agree.
All right, let's go into, you know, what the data is looking, you know, screaming at us right in the face, but nobody really wants to hear. So as we discussed with men, testosterone levels 30 to 40% decline since the 1980s, even after adjusting for age and obesity. Obesity, just a quick tidbit here, you can have lower levels of testosterone and obesity because fat cells can be more estrogenic, and you can convert the testosterone into estrogen. And then sperm counts are down 50% decline over 40 years. Like Tim was saying, it's not just females that suffer from infertility now. I forget what the prediction was. It was by like 2050 or something, that there would be like a massive decrease in population if we don't change this with
the
sperm
androgenic
counts.
problem.
Yes,
I agree.
Huge.
I don't remember the stats either.
Yeah,
We
I don't
see
either.
so
it was
many
scary.
stats.
It was scary enough to say, like, what are we doing and how are we not recognizing that we're literally killing our people? Sperm counts, as we said, and then rising male infertility, of course, due to the sperm declination.
I think if I ever wanted like a full-on AI robot, I would just want something that could follow me around and remind me of all the stats that I want to remember all the time. And
give us
it would
more.
just know me and be like, this is the one you want.
I am such a statistic person. I love it. Like, that's how I just like feed off of information.
You know, there's one real more quick thing we should mention as we continue talking about the data, but medicine has a blind spot in all of this. And, you know, shame on us in this profession, but as all of this is happening, we're also sort of stuck in the past and we're guided by this misguided model. We're just treating symptoms out here, right? Like we're like, oh, okay, you know, here's your testosterone's low. Here's some testosterone. We're not asking why.
Yep.
Why, as a doctor, am I seeing so many males under the age of 40, 50 coming in with low T? We ignore the upstream causes and, you know, unfortunately, there's no ICD-10 code for poison slowly from crops.
I know. And that patient that I treated his testosterone last week whenever it was of 110, he got a couple page document on how to avoid his endocrine disruptors. You know, stop using your Axe deodorant that you're putting on. Stop using the fresh hanging, you know, scenting thing in your car. My what?
We'll get to it.
Okay, sorry. I'm jumping
there.
ahead. I'm excited.
Okay. So we talked about men. Let's talk about women. Some statistics here. We did briefly mention the age of menarche earlier, dropped from about 13 or 14. We're down to 11 or 12. And, you know,
we see this a lot. Higher rates of PCOS, endometriosis, endocrine or estrogen dominant conditions, breast development in younger ages. And then kids, of course, we're seeing early puberty.
The neurodevelopmental effects,
Yeah, metabolic issues, obviously, that's a huge one right now in our pediatric population. And the hard question is this genetics? I hear this all the time. Is it genetics or is it exposure? I could just, you know, be rich if I had a penny for every time.
And how much is the exposure affecting the genetics, as we talked about? So we always say it. Life's, you know, genetics load the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger.
Absolutely.
So I think they're intertwined here.
Yeah, so let's talk about where endocrine disruptors hiding and what do we do about it. Of course, food. This is one of the biggest daily exposures to pesticide and herbicides, commonly documented endocrine disruptors. Like Tim said, atrazine, like we talked about before, estrogenic effects.
And as we go through these, you know, let's just kind of mention what they are. I think we have a lot of things listed in our notes here about like what they do. Let's skip over some of that. Let's just kind of talk about the names of some of them. I want people to hear these names more and more. I want you to hear it from our podcast. I want you to hear it when you listen to another one. I want you to see it on social media when you follow Food Babe. So let's just kind of run through maybe just some names and here and there some important ones.
Glyphosate, that's obvious. I think we have a whole podcast on that. I can't even pronounce this one.
The chlorpyrifos, yeah.
That's a thyroid issue and neurological issues.
2,4-D. And where are these showing up the most? Corn, wheat, soy, sugar. So again, this kind of goes back to my whole, if we are eating less gluten, if we're eating less wheat products, we're avoiding a lot of these pesticides, herbicides, endocrine disruptors. Not to mention all of the negative metabolic effects, the insulin resistance, the glucose spikes from these products. So again, these aren't really trace exposures. They're repeated, they're daily, they're lifelong.
And once again, just before we do this, because I know a lot of people say like organic is super expensive, I can't afford it. If you are eating fresh fruits and vegetables that are non-organic and that's what you can do, that's okay. I'd much rather you do that than eat a sludge of processed food that comes in a box with a barcode that you scan that has a shelf life longer than you. So if you feel like that you're just, I don't even know where to start eating more fruits and vegetables. If you can buy them organic, great. The Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen, you can follow that to see what are most pesticide sprayed and kind of avoid those and buy organic when you can. But if you can't buy organic because of price, I get it. But please don't go to processed food. I'd much rather you eat more of the back to the basics natural
And
food.
Please just Google if my fruit's not organic, how can I clean it?
Yeah,
and
a little bit better.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of that can be embedded, but yes, you can at least take off that, you know, a couple layers of that.
Agreed.
So,
All right, so plastic food packaging,
yes,
BPA, BPS, BPF, phthalates are a big one, right? And those are anti-androgenic, so you have to be aware of those.
Yeah.
And what are you finding these in?
Plastic containers, wraps, takeout containers, microwave plastic is the worst offender. If you have hot food in a plastic container, you're just leaching those microplastics. And we are up to consuming a credit card a week in microplastics and MRIs in deceased people when they're doing brain scans. And then of course, like cadavering and pulling apart their brain, they're finding microplastics in people's brains.
Yeah,
so,
significant amounts in the tissue.
Bad news.
So another one is can linings. You need to be You need to be aware that these also have your BPAs. They have epoxy resins. So think of your canned soups, beans, veggies, even sodas. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm not saying you can't ever eat these things. Like I do understand the benefit and the need to get it, but just be aware this is exposure. You're going to get these exposures every day. And, you know, just because it's like low BPA doesn't mean it's hormone neutral. We talked about dose, timing, exposure, all of that.
Yep.
So here's a big one that you like to talk about. Let's talk about personal care.
Yes, so absorbed through the skin. The skin isn't just a barrier. Yes, it obviously protects your body, but it's an entry point to your body. So fragrance is the biggest
This is
red
one you
flag.
harp on all the time,
Yes,
fragrances.
fragrance. You don't know what's in it, and that's the problem.
Can we mention your sister? Does she listen to this podcast?
Probably not. Shout out to her. She's
Yeah.
just, I always
We
call
love
her,
you, Meg.
and I tell her all the time, I'm like, you're a walking endocrine disruptor. She just like the Bath and Body
I just want to
Works
mention
and-
her, not to call out your sister, but to mention the typical American woman,
Yeah.
because I think she
Doesn't
just
even know.
falls into that category.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it was the last time I was there, I pulled in her drive and I walked in her house and I said, I can smell your candle from your driveway. It's like, shut this thing off, blow it out, do essential oils, whatever. If my air doctor was at her place, it would just be like, just be raging. But these are the things that we don't think about. Bath and Body Works, lotions, deodorant, body wash, hairspray, dry shampoo. I mean, imagine all the
Well,
things
you're into a different category of products. We're talking about fragrances at the moment,
well,
but
it
that's
still
okay.
can be fragrance.
Okay, fine.
All of those are fragrance. All of those have fragrance in it.
But that's okay. And I agree. Just think of anything fragranted as probably an endocrine disruptor, unless it's a super clean, natural,
and you
essential
trust the
oil.
company and
Right.
they can say, because fragrance can still be categorized under an essential oil, but usually they'll list that. They'll do fragrance and then in parentheses, they'll say whatever essential oil is in it. But per the FDA, when you say, or per some of these guidelines, when you put in fragrance, that is basically, well, you have no idea what that actually even means.
I shared probably my favorite like meme or reel or whatever from social media today. If anybody follows me, this had me cracking up. It was like where you could scroll on Instagram to the right and there was like 5 different messages and it was this person who's like getting into their Uber ride. And at the beginning it's like, hey, how you doing today? And then it says me getting in, how you doing today? Me getting out. So yeah, that was a great ride. And by the way, you should really look into that pine tree hanging from your mirror. Cause like I said, those endocrine disruptors, blah, blah, blah. It's like, have a good one.
That is
and they took it through like 5 different things on is like, and hey, by the way, you should really look into corporate capture and regulatory lobbying. And thanks for the ride. And it just cracked me up. But anyway.
Which is so ironic because every single time we've ever been in an Uber ride, I feel like I'm like, I can't breathe. Whatever fragrance you have hanging is making me choke.
Yes, that is actually you. But.
It's terrible.
Okay, so fragrances we mentioned. This is a big one for the phthalates, your DEP, your DBP, your DEHP. These are hidden, like you said, they'll say the words fragrance or parfum. You have to look for that. And you find these in your perfumes and then, like as you mentioned, some of the personal care products.
Yeah. Yep. Preservatives, that's another one. Parabens
Parabens are big
makeup, lotion, sunscreen, shaving cream. Sunscreens, we've talked about this before.
Remember some of the keywords, your oxybenzone, your octinoxate, and your homosalate.
In some of these parabens, like Tim mentioned, some of them can be not mentioned on the label. It's carried in the can that they come in with the chemicals that are in the sunscreen that create that chemical exposure. So some of these companies can really be sneaky. When you test them, they are very toxic, but they don't have to list some of these toxins because those are made by the bottle and the heat and the stuff that they're sitting in. So it's
super sneaky.
It's a tricky world out there, man.
All right, household products. So think chronic inhalation, right? These are things that are in your house. Chronic inhalation, skin contact. And your home's either a detox space or a constant exposure chamber. And I think it's important to note. So we did kind of briefly mention, but think of your detergents and your cleaners, and you're thinking phenols in those groups. And the endocrine effects are estrogen receptor activation.
Fabric softener, dryer sheets. I make my own laundry detergent. We have our own like dishwashing stuff too, like making sure that you're non-toxic as best you can.
And I know we're trying not to mention the effects too much, my own rule, so we could keep moving, but here is where you have in your fabric softeners and your dryer sheets, that's where you have your QACs, your quaternary ammonium compounds, the quats, and then not only the phthalates, but VOCs, which are volatile organic compounds. I mention these because these, more than some of the others, are actually respiratory. And when we start to think like, why do so many people have asthma? Why are so many people reactive to so many airborne kind of things? I think this starts to play some of those effects as well. And then, of course, all of the endocrine effects from them as well.
Just a little snippet here. I was shopping for pajamas for my youngest one. She's 2. And it was advertising that it was fire retardant. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like that? And that's common to have children's clothes be sprayed with the fire retardant. I'm like, I
think about that though. If you're the average parent who doesn't think in the way that we do about this, you see that like, oh, sweet, of course I want fire retardant pajamas for my kid. If our
house catches on fire, the only thing left is going to be the pajamas. Like that is so terrible to think. Meaning your child is going to sleep in that every single night, be absorbing that through their skin.
Exactly, that's my point.
On the very small chance that your house catches on fire and you can't get your child out, they're not going to like if the clothes are going to survive. Like that makes no sense to me.
I mean, I get it. Like, of course, I don't want the pajamas to burn burn. It gives you every more chance to get your child
Of
out.
course,
But think
yes.
the odds of your house catching on fire versus what your kid sleeps
Right.
in every night.
And
Like
instead,
it's
do more of like fire protocols in like
Right.
fire safety
Rope
than
ladders,
to
all that
have
kind of
your
stuff.
freaking child sleep in fire retardant every single day. And I shouldn't even be laughing at that, but that's just disgusting to
I
me.
mean,
Like I would never put my 2-year-old in
5
that.
years ago would have bought that. Yeah, I just
Probably.
would have. I absolutely would have.
I have no words. It's crazy.
All right, I just touched the microphone. Oh God, we got to stop soon. All right, non-stick cookware. This is a big one. You just got to
I
get
get
rid
this
of it.
a lot,
I don't
I
think
know.
I know some companies are trying to get better with this, but I do not think there is one single clean non-stick cookware.
If it's non-stick, there's a chemical on there that makes that happen. And I
these
know,
are the
guys,
forever
it
chemicals.
takes a very long time to understand how to cook with stainless steel. Tim is my personal like witness to this. I would burn everything where like the fire alarm was going off, the food tasted crappy, which I mean, I wasn't a great cook anyway, but it took a long time for me to understand how to cook with this. But I just was like, I'm not going back to it. I'm not going back to nonstick. And we're fine now.
And one thing to mention with stainless steel is there is a difference in quality as well.
Sure.
And some of the lower quality stainless steel can actually leach heavy metals
Yes.
and other things. So you do have to be careful with that too.
Yep.
Clothing, we did kind of get into
Yep.
this already, but just really think any synthetic fabrics like your polyesters, your nylons, your spandex, these are all treated with phthalates, plasticizers, dye stabilizers. It's all absorbed through the skin. You sweat, heat, anything you're doing, it's all there.
Quick thing for females. Your
As
underwear,
I'm wearing synthetic
your underwear
fabrics.
and your tampons. Guys, stop buying. You have tampons that are fragrance filled, and then you're putting them in a very, very absorbent area, and you just are asking for issues. So please try not to do that. Get the more silicone cups, or if you don't want to do that, get the cotton liners, whatever can work for you. And then underwear, of course, that is a very absorbable area. Do cotton underwear, 100% organic cotton if you can, not the nylon, not the synthetic, all that stuff.
So at the risk of, not sharing TMI about our personal lives, but I can tell you guys, there's just nothing that stimulates your love life more than seeing your wife walk down the hall with a big cotton swab hanging out her underwear. So
It's better than an endocrine disruptor.
It
And,
sure is.
it just is what it is at this point. I mean, I'll live a very long life with hormone, regulating.
good hormones
and
intact.
all the things. But you got to do what you got to do. They're cheap. And like, there's an alternative. If you're in the grocery store and you're getting like pads and liners, there's an organic option. I got an entire box of them just last week at Kroger for $10. Like,
Yeah.
when
And
you have an option, choose the better
Just
one.
to show you how committed my wife is to this lifestyle, I can also name at least 3 vacations where we've had to run out of some public spot because you've bled all over something because you will not wear tampons.
I will not do it. I mean, this in my defense, not even in his defense, screw him. In my defense, this is when I was trialing those silicone cups, which now I like, but it took me a long time to figure out. So here's a pro tip for you guys. If you're trying to use the silicone cups, the first 3 times that you use them, don't be on vacation, because that's when I tried. And
One time we were on a white boat.
it failed. It
A
failed.
white
yeah.
boat
But
seat.
thank God it was very easily,
God.
washable with some ocean water.
Sorry, Mexico.
But
Anyway,
I'm like, I'll never see these people again. I could care less. I'm not going to
we
disrupt my
ran.
friggin' hormones for this. You ran. I was just
ran.
like,
That's right. I did. I ran. My face was
no
red.
shame
I think
here.
I cried.
I'll never see him again.
Okay, anyway, so I think we've hit that. The big takeaway, it's not about fear, it's just about awareness. Again, I think it's about try to get good, better, best. Again,
Yep.
I'm wearing a shirt today that's definitely synthetic. I wish I wasn't, but I think the majority of my clothes are probably cotton. And it gets better. It takes time. So
Yeah, you got to
just
do
work
what you can.
towards it.
And it's not just about clothes. Like we said, we've named 1,000 other things that you can change in your life. It's not just about clothes. Like we said, read the labels. Fragrance, red flag, unless you trust the company and know it's essential oils. Food swaps, organic. We already talked about the dirty dozen, filtered water.
Gotta filter the water. You have to filter water. If you guys aren't doing that by now, that should be like
Yeah.
step 1.
Yeah, go back to podcast 1 and start over. And then once you get to this episode, you might learn a thing or two. The natural fibers, great for clothing. Medicine meets lifestyle. So you can't detox what you keep re-exposing. You can't just constantly say, oh, I'm going to go in the sauna every day and detox, but then I'm going to, hydrate with all of these, poor water and poor food and sleep and all this other things. It has to be that lifestyle change.
We mentioned glass. Get rid of the plastic products for glass. Try to use stainless steel. And, of course, unscented cleaners, the cleanest stuff. Think of all the microplastics, your Tide Pods, your dishwasher detergents. You got to get rid of that stuff. It's time to get rid of that. And progress trumps perfection every single time.
Yeah, guys, we'll wrap it up here. But the biggest picture here is I know how absolutely just like not only confusing, but overwhelming this can be for people that are just starting off. Especially if you haven't followed us for a while, this podcast might be like, oh my gosh, I'm doing everything wrong in my life. But it's not about like fear mongering your way through life. It's about understanding your surroundings, being aware, and being aware that you have choices. And whatever you're choosing to live in, there is a choice to live a little bit healthier with those things. I still clean my house. We still wear, normal clothes. There's things that you can do. You just swap in. It's almost like you can have your cake and eat it too, just a healthier version of that cake. So those are the things that I, tell my patients, like we still live an awesome lifestyle, but we are very much aware of all of these things that we constantly surround ourselves with in our children. Because I hear this all the time. Well, back in my day and I survived. Well, back in your day is significantly different than it was back in our day. You can compare a bag of Doritos from back then to now. It's not the same food. It's not the same chemicals. And it is significantly more
The
higher
two
exposure.
ingredients that used to be McDonald's French fries were potatoes and beef tallow.
Yeah, and now it's like 55 ingredients in a McDonald's French fry. So the moral of that story is that it's not the same environment that we used to live in. And if we don't advocate for not only ourselves, but the generations to come, an example, our children, we are in a world of trouble. So
I agree. Thank you very much for listening along. This was a little bit longer. We're approaching an hour, so we appreciate that. If you benefit from this, if you think anyone else could benefit, please share it. Please tell a friend, and please tune in next week. We have lots of good stuff coming this season.
Yeah, vote with your dollars, guys. If the system won't fix this, but informed people might. So like I said, vote with your dollars, start choosing the companies that know and understand that, and it'll make a world of difference for your health. I promise that. So just a reminder, this podcast is for informational purposes only, and it is not medical advice. This is not a substitute for professional care, diagnosis, and or treatment. Always consult with your healthcare provider before making any changes to your health routine. Remember, you have the power. Join us in next time to get more knowledge and more knowledge about myself.
You have the power. We will give you the knowledge.
Thank you, guys. See you next week.